Sikhs from around the world by showcasing their professions, passions, and perspectives. I'm your host, Mandheer Singh, aka the Nihung.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Today, my guest on the Nihung's arena is Harjap Singh. Harjap, how are you doing?
Good. How are you, Virji?
Good. It's good to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of introduce yourself to my listening audience?
Sure. So I'd love to mention I've met Virji over the last handful of years. So that's how we've, developed a friendship. Especially with real estate. That's kind of been one of the central points in our relationship, along with many other philosophical discussions. And
yeah, we have a lot of those.
Yeah, especially early on. There's a lot of stuff that Virji has definitely challenged me on, that definitely has made me into, I would say, a better person.
Well, no, challenging though is a two-way street. There's a lot of stuff that you say that we take so many just things for granted that we've been taught over the years. And sometimes we regurgitate information. And there's been many times where the way you challenge it makes me stop and say, you know what, I need to think about this and see if this is really something I believe, or did I just pick this up from somebody else?
Well, it's likewise. I mean, there's been definitely many things I've been with my own belief systems, however they get developed over time, that you start to just fall into the habit of believing things. And definitely it's a breath of fresh air to have someone that truly challenges you. I know you love playing devil's advocate, so sometimes you may not even, yeah, of course. So, if anyone knows Mandheer Virji, that many times he might even be saying things that might not even be his beliefs in a sense, but he's trying to challenge you in how you think. And I think this is a great podcast you've started, because you're definitely going to, challenge, I suppose, your listeners even while you're having these discussions, but, you're going to provide hopefully new insights that people in their everyday lives won't be having on a day-to-day basis, where you don't generally have the time to have these kinds of discussions. So I appreciate you, establishing this platform for the audience that, we hope that, you're able to cultivate in the future.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that I'm going to challenge anybody. That's one of the reasons why I'm bringing on different types of guests, is because I know they think about things in a different way and have certain perspectives that will challenge. And that's actually one of the reasons I brought you on today is like you mentioned, all this real estate stuff. There's something about real estate, but then there's also something about economic philosophies and social philosophies that apply to real estate. And you seem to have quite a passion for that.
Absolutely.
So go ahead.
Well, just to give a little bit about myself, I grew up in a very privileged household. Both my parents were doctors. They're now retired. They were always involved in the community, the Sikh community, even at, the larger, I would say, just political, local community for Michigan. My dad always, if anyone from Michigan in general would have a sense of who my dad might be.
Well, yeah, your dad is Dr. Mandheer Singh Tadli, and he is very integral to the Sikh society here in Michigan. I mean, he's been here from the very beginning, and he's helped establish a lot of that. But he's also one who has a strong personality, and he makes his opinions known.
It is true. And I mean, as even recently with he's always been politically involved, whether it's in the Sikh causes or even just in, national U.S. politics to whatever degree, but always trying to, I think his, since he was an immigrant, first generation, always trying to basically bring that Sikh perspective with Dr. Aulick as well, with, him being such a strong force with that in DC when he was here, and, trying to bring that push for the recognition of Sikhs within the U.S. system, to be able to, have politicians recognize even the genocide that occurred against Sikhs, even whether you, not just in 1984, but prior, all the things that have been going on with Sikhs. But so that's, my father's been always someone that, he's challenged me in many ways, good and bad. It's always good and bad. It's never to, throw anyone under the bus, but in the way that you can also, like how we, in our relationship, we've challenged each other to grow in our weak points. And my dad, his compassion has always been something that, whether, he was trying to help Dharmi Fajis with the local Sikh community with a group they started called Seva, and that was supposed to, help people. And even now, he was telling me he's trying to help with a group out of California and others of trying to bring back some refugees from Afghanistan to India. And so, that's definitely been a solid point in my life that I've seen constantly this role of activism that, when I've gotten older, I then actually started to appreciate it more, because when you're young, you're in your own world, you're playing with other kids. And so, my mom's always been there as the, rock of the house, always keeping things together, which I'm sure most mothers are like that. And, and she's always brought that, softer side, and that's, helped me become softer. And, I still want to become, a gentler person, just like my mom. But so, just to, just sum it up real quick. But so, when you have two doctor parents, you'll have, less time with them many times just because they're working so long. So
right.
So the issue that happened, Virji, is, my upbringing had, like I've shared with you many times, and even just with your sort of, experience with you having younger kids and reminding you, hey, this time's not going to be there forever, that you're going to be able to spend with them. And I know you're definitely, thinking a lot better than most parents on that front, but just to, from my own experience, to be able to share to people that, when you don't have as much time with people. And this goes back to, I think, what will be one of the central points in the discussion that I'd love to touch on today. When you don't have much time that you spend with each other, you don't have the ability to build these strong bonds. And the idea in life for me is you either can build bonds, which, I want to try to bring this back to Sikhi in any way that I'm able, because I know that the perspective you want to, at least from, I understand this should be a more Sikhi based, but where even the gurus, I would imagine one of their key philosophies would have been to seek to build bonds between people and not be divisive. And we have in a time where obviously there's great division, and in that division, you can either see, where do you stand? You have people today where they have, these, hats on. I'll say just that they have these hats that to me indicate that they are more of a divisive force, because that's the energy I feel from that side. And so in the sense, when you're growing up with parents, you don't have as much time together, you don't build that bond, you don't want to, or you don't feel that connection to want to make them proud, because you want to feel that you have someone there that you respect as someone that is your elder, your parent, or anyone of a position of authority over you when you're younger. And if you don't have that, you don't have the guardrails. When you don't have guardrails to keep you in check when you're young, and basically if you are let to your own devices, it is hard to stay, completely on a moral path, because you need, whether it's, the guru, you need Sangat, you need these people, these philosophies in your life to keep you on a path of righteousness. And so in my life, what happened, just to sum up, my brief history, I'm 31. So in my life, I spent time, astray because I feel a lack of bonds, relationships. And it's no blame to anyone, because I realize at the end of the day, I take full responsibility for my life, now as an adult, and I've sought to rebuild these bonds with my parents. We have better relationship than ever. So I'm very grateful for that. And
because there's a lot of it. A lot of it has to just do with circumstances. Immigrant parents that are working very hard. This is a common story with a lot of kids, right? And so basically, you got to a point where you were able to recognize the lack of that, get yourself on track, and rebuild those relationships with your parents.
Absolutely.
And you're working towards that positive end. And you talked about building these bonds because of this experience. You take a very different approach to how you view society now.
Yes.
And you actually have you've at least opened my eyes into there's a possibility of a different future for real estate.
Well, it is real estate. And then I like to even think in the largest terms of humanity, of planet Earth. We've talked about Star Trek. We've talked about the idea I haven't personally watched Star Trek, but you've told me about the idea that, I've always talked about what if we had a society that was fully automated? Right. And so you mentioned in Star Trek, this device that can replicate anything. So in the sense that real estate is one pivotal point that can bring us more to not just a sense of an automated world, but a world that has more meaning, because the whole, I think, search in life centers around meaning. If we want to, bring it back to Sikhi and the little bit that I've, learned and tried to grow on that path, the central, I think, theme, and not just life, but Sikhi, is trying to provide you that meaning, that true meaning. And that will always fulfill you and be constantly fulfilling. The idea that just jera samundar hega inna dunga hega, and the positivity, the gyan, the bliss, and the fulfillment is ever deepening. It never ends. And the idea that Vaheguru is, constantly like Hari, everything is constantly blooming, ever new. And this feeling that life, if on that path where you are not seeking division, but you're seeking growth, you're seeking bonds, you're seeking to truly become one. Because when if in Sikhi we're told your just toda, mission jara hega is to, join with Vaheguru, is to, apna mool pachan, is to understand who you are, which is part of this greater whole. And to, unite yourself, whether the Atma with Paramatma, and to create this union and to become that true yogi, and to create this sense of no division, to have this sense that there are no bounds, that you've created all the bonds that, would need to exist. Just like on a cellular level, your body is full of bonds, full of trillions of cells working in harmony. If you truly want to, I would imagine, seek Vaheguru, the only way possible is to truly reduce all divisions, reduce all attachments, and to truly only connect to the truth, and which is boundless, which is, timeless, which is, without birth, without death, which is, this oneness that if you want to truly expand your consciousness, then, going back to real estate, to bring it back to a real level, on a community level, on a family level, you want to be able to create communities that, if in, Ortonville, where I live, we have, strong presence of Republicans. We have, it's a countryside, a small village, 1,500 people. We have, even in these areas, you look on a county by county level, throughout the United States, even in the most red areas in the country, you have still strongholds in every one of those areas where there will be at least 10, 20, 30% of the Democrats. And it doesn't mean I'm saying at all that Democrats or Republicans, one side is right or wrong, but
yeah, you're just describing what the environment is, because there is a certain mentality. And like you said, you're noticing that division, the divisiveness. Yes. It's not even just that people are intentionally being divisive. They are being programmed the division, and then perpetuating it further.
Well, to say the least, I think Trump has been a beacon of hope in a way, and also obviously a very detrimental force in the country for its progress. But, of course, anything in life, you have to go through
You're going to
struggle.
need to clarify that. So when you say a beacon of
Yes.
hope,
Yes.
you
Yes.
mean a beacon of hope to?
Well, so the idea being, so I know you love the working out examples. So, Arnold Schwarzenegger or anyone, Lou Ferrigno, whoever you want to pick.
Okay.
I know Arnold's your favorite because obviously he's on our side in many ways politically as well. So when you go to the gym, you have to put yourself through pain. You have to put yourself through struggle, through even breaking down. You have to actually break down muscle fibers for them to grow stronger.
That's right. Yeah.
So Trump, in my view, the moment he was elected, and even before he was elected, I saw the chance for a country to go through a struggle that could bring itself out stronger. Now, look, the Women's March was one of the most successful marches that you could have imagined that could have existed in response to Trump and in general for all the things that, people on the progressive side that they want to be fighting for. The Women's March and all the other activism that's come after it. Granted, it's been in a scenario that we would have hoped to have avoided. But it's brought out in many ways the best of other people, because when the fight gets the strongest, then that means those that are on the side or on either side, but on the side of, I would say, righteousness, they have to then stand up tallest. They have to stand up and fight the hardest. In those times when the battle grows and it becomes stronger, then people have to fight stronger. Many people may do it by activism, by donations, by feeding people, many number of ways. Lawyers, fighting for the rights of people and setting new precedents. And going back to a side point that in today's world, I've mentioned to Virji many times that nowadays the fight for power hasn't been, and this is an obvious point I would feel, but many people might need to hear it. But the fight for power, especially in, even in the context of the title of this podcast, because when you think of the idea of a Nihung, you think of a warrior that uses force in many ways. One side of a Nihung being this, this army of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, of the Khalsa Panth. This idea that force is the way to change things, and not in the context of Sikhi, in the context that the world has seen people throughout time, whether Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, many times for the worst, that they've used force to get their ways accomplished. Now, in today's world, force is not as much of a relevant force, although, yes, the U.S. wields the greatest sabers in the world, and that's
right. But still, we know it's an information game now.
Yes, and that's where the power of the law, the power of the qalam, the pen, that's mightier than the sword. And so to actually fight now today's battles, now obviously we take great inspiration from the gurus. We see how they've physically wielded not just hatyars, but how they've wielded their own minds, their philosophies, their true spirituality, their true connectedness with the truth in a way that is intellectual. And in that battle, how they've, manipulation is seen as a negative word. But I believe when someone has a higher level of, in a sense, when you're more spiritual, but also people who are con men like Trump, they're able to use their power of manipulation in either obviously negative ways like Trump. But when you're spiritually righteous and you have that babek buddhi that you can use to see through, a few layers deep that, normally people may not be seeing. Like the idea, many Trumpists or whatever you want to say, the Trump fans will say Trump is playing 4D chess.
Right.
The idea is the gurus played beyond 4D chess. The gurus played a game where, some Sikhs may believe the gurus could do anything they wanted, move a mountain. Now, I won't get into that debate, but the point being, when you are able to see more layers deep, when you are able to see and discern someone's personality and see where they might act, because in essence, life is a tree of action in the sense that when you take one action, it leads on a path that opens up more corridors. And if you're able to map out potentially what the separate actions one might take, like let's say in battle, you're able to counterflank. And so the gurus in that sense, and in general, I think when you're able to use that level of discernment to bring about change in a good way, you can manipulate, obviously the systems at play, even other people, whether it's, any sort of emperor, president, anything to get your will done, but for righteousness. And, ultimately, I think that's where the power of the pen today and using intellect with education is generally the way that we'll have to change the world. We still should, obviously, as Sikhs and just generally as human beings, still fight for the right to keep ourselves protected with the kirpan. With obviously, kirpan holds other symbolic and meanings, deeper meanings as well than just a weapon, but that we also keep our rights to, in a sense, I hate to get political, but to bear arms, but in a righteous way.
Yeah. So actually, going back to the point you were making, first of all, this is not your retrospective analysis, because I can attest to the fact that before Trump got elected, you were already saying this, that someone like him needs to become president in order for the righteous people, or the people that are going to actually make the progressive changes that are needed, to step up and react to someone like him. So, and I would always, be uncomfortable with that. I'd be like, come on, man, what are you saying? We don't have to do this. We don't have to go through this. We know what to do. We can do it. But the reality was, we weren't pressure tested. And that pressure test exposed leaks. Those leaks are now very obvious. You can see our response to natural disasters. You can see our response to other crises like COVID, and the cracks that were exposed that would not have been exposed otherwise. It doesn't justify it. We're not saying it's okay. It's just looking at what is happening and what has happened, and saying, hey, I can see what needs to happen for us to get to the point we need to get to. And we can either take a track that's going to take 100 years of slow progress, or we can go through something very tough and challenging right now and come out of the other end in 10, 20 years.
Absolutely. And, just to also reiterate, and I know Virju would agree, I would never want this path of destruction to occur. If there was a better path forward, obviously we want that. And it's not that I even would ever hope that, some people, there's a segment of people that might think, hey, if I vote for Trump, even if I don't agree with him at all, I'm doing that so that I can hasten the progress by using this sort of, logic that, somehow by, causing the darkness to come quicker, it will bring us closer to the light.
And it's similar to like maybe Antifa types that want to create the conflicts. Their purposely coming in, creating these conflicts that cause the destruction because they're trying to accelerate the process.
And on that note,
maybe misguided. It may be misguided.
Yes, and I believe it's misguided because in the sense that just when I went to retreats and camps, especially Singh's retreat in Toronto.
Yeah.
And you were there. I love that.
That was a great camp for me.
Yeah, didn't we ride together? I forget.
We didn't ride together. We just met. We just met up there.
Okay.
But that was a really fun camp. That was a great camp. I enjoyed it.
It was. And one thing that I remember from there was, can you reiterate the point you were just making, just to jog my memory again?
No, I was just saying like Antifa and those types.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So the idea that there was a Virji out of Calgary, Harjap Singh, great at Sakhis. I love hearing him always. He's amazing. He inspires me with his.
How about Harjap Singh of Basics of Sikhi?
Hanji. Yeah. He's an amazing guy. And, so he was mentioning the idea of Biras. I mean, I don't know his kind of tradition or where he falls in the sort of spectrum of all the different what would you call it?
I think he's independent. I don't know him
Okay.
super well. I've only met him a few times, but from talking to him, what I understand, he's pretty independent.
Right. But one thing he really, I feel I took away was you can always redirect energies in either good or positive, a bad or negative way. Sorry,
Yeah.
positive or negative.
Right. Positive
So
and negative.
the idea that when you have this passion, you're truly passionate about something, you feel, wow, there's some injustice going on.
Yeah.
In the Sikh tradition, we have Sakhis. I think back to one maybe that Mandheer Singh mentioned. He mentioned that Guru Gobind Singh Ji, or maybe in the times of those battles, Sikhs or Guruji, even if if the Sakhi wasn't even true, the sentiment I take away as being the philosophy behind it, but that Guruji was putting gold tipped spears or the points at the end of arrows.
Yeah.
And so the idea that you're able to compassionately still wield, your weapons in a way you do not seek harm, you do not seek to, vengefully, like bloodthirstily hurt anyone, but you still are seeking to disarm them, to stop the threat, because you've used all other means. And so when the final means of weapons and to physically stop the threat has to be used, you still think of the family, that the family, once they retrieve the body of this, soldier, that they still have this gold tipped arrow that they can use as, to continue on their lives, like a form of life insurance. But the idea, though, even in battle, you have to do it in a way that is compassionate. And that is where Antifa and the groups, whether you want to say the right-wing Proud Boys or whatever the extremes are on either side, they come from a very anger-based philosophy. And even though they may have correct points, like Antifa might say they're fighting injustice, if you do not do it by the right means, the means do not always justify the ends. You must do it the right way.
Yeah.
And that's
the Sikh way, at least.
Yes. And ultimately, Trump does not obviously represent at all the Sikh way. But when we think of Hukum, when you even mentioned the idea of Hukum with, Ruth Bader Ginsburg passing away, she died. We have to accept it. Yet we, in the sense of Trump, may not want Trump to win another 4 years. But obviously, whatever, and when I say we, I'll say I don't want to speak for anyone else. I may not want Trump to win for another 4 years, but I have to accept the outcome. But I will do my part, whether it's in voting, whether it's in activism, calling, phone banking. But ultimately, the world is much more than me. The world is much more connected in all these infinite variables that has all these people and everything at play. So we can do our part. But that's where, in the sense of when you, let's say, are able to map out certain paths in life, certain trajectories, let's say, and you can see just by looking in an unbiased fashion, if you try to look at, all the potential outcomes and you try to figure, okay, this one has this likelihood, this one has this much. And many professions in business and healthcare, they'll use this type of analysis. But on a general, just personal level, looking at the world, looking at, your relationships, friends, you can almost, do that on that level where you could think, oh, I invited this person to go out to eat. I know they're going to decline it just because I know that's the path that they're more likely to take. The point being, you use this kind of philosophy to be able to see through some events. You kind of can see through and see things past when they've even occurred, before they've occurred. And in that sense, with Trump, we have to, I have to accept the fact that I do my part, but I have to accept that the world will decide. And I'm one part of that world. And we may want.
Yeah. And when you said the world like that, that brings up another point. We see Trump a certain way, but really he is a symptom.
Yeah.
The whole world has been moving more towards nationalistic political.
Yes.
Like agendas. A lot of governments around the world are becoming more nationalist. We already saw this happen in India before Trump got elected. Trump was just another one in that similar direction. It's it's an anti-global type thing, global economies and global exporting cultures and things like this. Everybody's kind of pulling back a little bit, and it was happening everywhere, and it's happening here. And then bringing up your analogy about the 4D chess, I'm not sure that he is playing 4D. I don't even know if he knows what 4D means or if he knows how to play chess. But you are right that the chess is thinking of every move you make, thinking of the possible counter moves, right? Yep. And then trying to think 1, 2, 3, 4 steps ahead. This is what I'm going to, if he does this, I'm going to do that and that. If she does this, I'm going to do this, this, and that. Like thinking multiple steps ahead, seeing through the action on the board.
There you go. So, Trump is, he's all obviously, if anyone's just looking in an unbiased way, simply for himself. He's always trying to push his own interests on a just personal level. It's, whether it's the moment he was elected, he was already campaigning. Yeah. That's unheard of. This is a norm that, you just with the RNC, when is it normal that you have the RNC on the lawn of the White House? Now, granted, COVID isn't normal.
It's a normal, in a normal like world, that's actually illegal.
Right. And that's the thing. We've gone past certain guardrails you would expect to have as a so-called democracy. And that then brings into question, where is America in terms of its empire status? And in the sense that, I've heard of Noam Chomsky speaking recently that, not just recently, he's been speaking of this much longer than I've been alive, but the idea that America is now a falling empire. My parents came here for the land of opportunity. Yet, if you think about this, the Sikhs or anyone who came, end of segregation, imagine coming to a place in the world at that time where you may be coming from, granted in India, my grandfather told me that even in those times, there were separate places for Muslims and Hindus to, have drinking fountains. So there was that separation. Obviously, India has its own challenges still today with that type of class, casteism and all that. But imagine coming to America, even in the 60s, 50s, and you still see whites only, blacks only. That's ridiculous.
Actually, my dad came in 58.
Well, there you go.
So but even then, they came to America because they did see it as a land of opportunity. They did see it as someplace, because where they were at, they felt they were very limited and controlled. And even if you talk to my dad, which I'm hoping I can get him on the podcast too.
Oh, that'd be great.
Even then, at that time, there was a feeling of, there is a lot of corruption in India. There is a lot of, the truth is a very difficult thing in India. Everybody looks for bribes. Everybody wants to bribe. So even just those little kinds of things were enough for them to say, hey, we're going to leave here and go to America where we can do anything. And that was 58. So people all through the 1900s had that feeling that they could come to America and build a better life, even though we're talking about an era where we didn't even have the civil rights movement yet. We didn't even have, even early on, women didn't have the right to vote, but Sikhs were still coming to America.
Right. And now I've heard of, it was really just Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank. I heard say this in a very kind of profound way. So Kevin O'Leary was talking to some students, I believe they were American students, and he was just telling them, look, your parents or people came here to America for opportunity, that this was a land of opportunity. Now, in this day and age, if I was your age, he was saying, he would be going to China. He would be going to Singapore. Indonesia.
Indonesia, South Korea or something.
And it brings up some points where America's obviously gone through a lot of change over its time as a country, for the better for the most part. And when you put it in that perspective, we, aren't worse as a country, but economically there's a progression that countries will go through that, through my, little, research into this, even with Steve Bannon talking about him obviously being one of those ones propping up these neo-fascists like Bolsonaro and others. He's talked about a book called The Fourth Turning. This book talks about that generationally and cyclically in the world, there's these 4 cycles in the world or through time that occur through generations. And it can start through, you can mimic it by sort of seeing it how there's a initial generation. That's the, I'm not very clear on the concept, but the idea being that the cyclical nature with, the silent generation, baby boomers generation, the millennials and so on, there's certain qualities that define them basically. So each generation with those qualities acts in that similar way. So imagine you split up, time periods within a 4 generation cycle. The idea being that each generation within that cycle has certain qualities. So I'll give a real just quick example where if you think of Nancy Pelosi, you think of Chuck Grassley, Leahy, the retired Senator Orrin Hatch, or others that were very old and are very old now in politics. And, Conyers from Detroit, which my dad was just telling me yesterday that this seat in Detroit has been occupied since the 30s or 40s by the same family.
Right.
It's ridiculous. But the point being, you have now power that's been in the hands of a certain group, generally these baby boomers, nothing against baby boomers, but they skipped over your generation in a broad sense. Generation X was not allowed the reins of power.
Right.
So that's
interesting.
a defining feature that in these cycles, a certain generation will take over power, but then hold on and skip generations where they don't have a say.
That's true even at the Gurdwara level. That happened at the Gurdwara. The older, the people that we're calling uncle. Now our Gurdwara is great. Okay, I don't want to put it into a negative light like that because I think they all do a great job, and we've actually done a great job of integrating the younger generation and stuff like that too.
Yeah,
but in general, looking at Gurdwaras around the world, you're right, that baby boomer generation has held on to that power, and they've rejected that the next generation, the Generation X, even though we're in our 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, they've rejected that we would be able to do a good enough job. And then somehow there's a new younger generation that is very motivated in not taking no for an answer and interjecting themselves.
It's not even a motivation. I think it's just a general balance of life that has to occur, because if it's not Generation X that takes it, well, eventually they're going to die.
Someone has to, right.
Yeah,
the pendulum is swinging, and more it's swinging basically.
And so in America, you go through all these times, slavery, segregation, and now we're doing a second, third, fourth civil rights movement, whatever you want to call it. But things over time have gotten better. However, economically, that whole world power status has receded, whether you want to measure it by the world reserve currency and how much is being held, whether you want to measure it by the idea of a petrodollar and the receding global prominence that oil will have on the world stage. And that then, you could talk about the allyship with Saudi Arabia and how that was born with the OPEC nations and that whole kind of evil sort of contract and allyship that the country has created with those countries due to their civil rights records and how they treat people. Not to say we don't obviously have our own, but to I've always thought, how would the gurus think in terms of, would they really be doing these types of things? I don't think the gurus would be saying, let's sell billions of dollars in arms to Saudi Arabia. Right. I don't think that would be the MO. But that then again, there are ways that you, I think in a righteous way, can manipulate, even the evil actors for your favor, but not empower them. And that's the high-minded way that would require, great spirituality, great groundedness to be able to even pull that off, because you will. Well,
you have to believe it first too. Someone has to believe that that's even an option. And a lot of times we don't even believe that that's an option because we just kind of accept things the way that they are. And when we start to believe that that's an option, and then we put our voice forward, it will be heard eventually. And that's why I've said this in previous episodes too, but when we talk about Sikhs getting into corporations and into governments and becoming policymakers and influencers at a large scale. That's how we change the world for better, because we will take our Sikh values and bring them into these organizations.
And, it brings up, when Tulsi Gabbard was running, and I hate to assume people are so focused on these things and, because I know, Virji, you listen to CNN often, so I know you get your news from
way less than I used to. But yeah, I mean, look, MSNBC.
Nothing wrong with CNN though.
MSNBC is extremely left. Fox News is extremely right. So most of the time, getting the news in general from CNN. But with I understand, I get it. So I'm being careful, but I also pop over to some of the other things and pay attention. What they're saying.
What you should pop over to, and I'll just say this to the audience, especially more maybe the older audience. I've learned more on reddit.com when it comes to personal human experience, because it's not about, to me, the headlines. It's about what's under the headlines, what's under the actual people writing about their personal experiences. I'll give you an example. When the Beirut explosion happened.
Yeah.
I could read real time people telling their experiences being in Lebanon.
Giving their eyewitness account. They were there.
And not just even being there, but the idea of they're experiencing this event. It's not from a journalistic perspective.
Right.
You're an outsider writing about an event. You're actually living this scenario. You then have the passion to, basically say, hey, look, the government has neglected these things. They haven't cleared out whatever this substance was. And, they're giving this real account. So I would say, mainstream media, it has its purpose, but in the realest sense, I think in today's world, to build, at least in my view, the most well-rounded, or at least a better well-rounded, even outside of the normal just cable news channels or just regular broadcast news, you really, if you can dive deeper online, not just, I'm not even mentioning you because I know you even do this, but getting out of Facebook, those are all bubbles.
Yeah.
When you have your friends all saying the same things, yes, it might be true, but it's important to empathize with those that may not have those same views, because, well, that's where, if you truly want to change the minds of others, which the gurus, obviously we're the experts at that. When you can, within Gurbani, to be able to tap into someone's psyche at a level that will transform them, that's a very profound thing. And I know you mentioned to me many times over time that the main kind of, thing that the one of the most powerful things someone can do is change your thinking.
Yeah.
And the guru, with the idea of gurmat, is changing your thinking in a spiritual way. And that will reflect in your worldly ways you act and so on. But in the end, where if you're in these bubbles, you will not be able to empathize with those people that may be those Trump supporters that are equally human beings, that are equally with the Atma within them of Vaheguru, that you are trying to spark or further their lantern of Vaheguru within them, not to have this as a patriarchal approach that, hey, I'm the one who knows God and you are dark. And no, but in the sense that, yes, there is darkness and light. Yes, the gurus, we would say, were the beacons of light. Yes, we would say people like Aurangzeb were the darkness in the world. Yes, we would say the gurus even said, like in the Zafarnama, that please, was it Aurangzeb, change your ways, join the brotherhood of mankind, join the good side. Just like in Star Wars with the Force and whatnot. Yeah. But the idea, though, you must empathize. You cannot be like Antifa. You cannot be seething with anger to try to off with the heads with not the gold-tipped arrow, but you do it with, if you're doing it with vengeance, with I just want to kill them. That is completely wrong.
Yeah, and in this day and age, it's maybe a gold-tipped tongue, because
there you go.
What we're not paying attention to, and I absolutely agree with you on this point, because what's happened is, first of all, even Trump or anybody, Wade Michael Page, the racist that attacked in Oak Creek, all these people, Gurbani has already told us that they are suffering from Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Ahankar, just like the rest of us. And some people suffer with it so much they act out.
Yeah.
Right. Like if your ego is so big that you can't hear a criticism of something you said, and so you have to double down on it, and then go find people to prove that what you said is true. That's your ego acting out. It's not that he is a force of evil, because Ik Onkar doesn't leave any room for evil forces. Right? There's no evil forces in Ik Onkar. Ik Onkar is Waheguru is one.
Right.
And there is no enemy of Waheguru. There is nothing with power against Waheguru, right? So that's why when we say timeless and all powerful means there's nothing with any kind of power. Nirpo, Nirvad, no enemies, because there is nobody who could qualify, no being could qualify to be the enemy of something that is all powerful and just one. So
sorry, go ahead.
But I was just going to say, so there's no evil force, but we do that. We label. So we'll label Trump as bad. Then we'll go and say anybody that supports him is bad. And then we'll go a step further and say, if you are a Trump supporter, I don't care if you die, just defriend me. I don't want to have anything to do with you. And now we just isolated ourselves from a human being.
Right.
Maybe they're ignorant. Maybe they are justified in the way they think because they've had a certain life experience that has drawn them towards whatever answer they're seeing there. And when we cut ourselves off, we're not having conversations anymore. And then the problem just gets worse. And that happens in the Panth. That happens in the Sikh Panth.
Right. Oh, yeah.
We have different groups.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, like there's Sikh missionary, and then this guy is a Guru Nindak, and that guy is this. And now we can't talk to that guy, and we're going to beat him up, or we're going to protest. It's like, no, we need to talk.
Yeah.
We need to be having conversations. When we're having conversations and we learn to understand from their perspective, we don't have to agree with them.
Right.
But we can understand their perspective.
Absolutely.
And understanding their perspective now, maybe you can come up with a better way to get your message across. When you can get when you have a better way of getting your message across,
there you go.
You're now sharing and changing.
Yeah.
And now it's at real time, actual change.
No, that's so important to even what's going on today. Obviously where with these divisions, if you don't build those bonds, you won't have that, unity. And from the Sikh side, obviously the idea, I love this idea of the gold tipped tongue, because it really brings together the idea that now today's, force that we're using for good is the pen, is the tongue. And at least in more majority than just, hey, let's whip out the guns and the swords and whatnot, where, one thing that I've been critical with, I think with you and my, on my thoughts of, general mainstream Sikhi is people have so much attached themselves to the macho, I don't want to call it macho, but in the sense of, hey, the guns, the this, the that, the talwars, let's, all the mighty parts of it, where the idea though is, what were you telling me once? You said maybe it wasn't you, but I think you would understand this. Even the ones that were the most, fierce warriors were also the softest poets.
Right, right.
So that philosophy that you do not just, resort to this because you're drawn to the idea, we have this history of a martial type tradition.
Well, it romanticizes everything, right? If I talk about Baba Deep Singh to anybody, everybody knows the story of Baba Deep Singh drawing the line in the sand with his, 40 kilogram or whatever. I don't even know how heavy they say it is. His sword, his big khanda is, huge. And then the story that everybody remembers is that in battle, he had his head cut off, and he had sworn that he would, die in the Prakarma of the Bar Sahib, and that he rode headless, holding his head, and threw his head into the Prakarma, and then that's how he passed away. That's how he was shaheed. Right. So we romanticize those stories. And I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm not saying it did happen. I can even imagine a way that it could happen. scientifically speaking. Like we can justify things and we learn things all the time that explain things. So I'm not trying to get into that so much.
Yeah.
But that's not who Baba Deep Singh was. Baba Deep Singh was a scholar. He was a master of languages. He was tasked with writing Guru Granth Sahibs into different languages.
Right.
Okay. And it wasn't an easy task. It was very difficult because you had to know those languages well. Wow. And you also had to distribute these things. His work wasn't on the battlefield. His work was scholarly.
Right. It's the behind the scenes people don't see. Yes. They want to see the action part. You don't see the production behind the scenes.
And actually, that's why he was able to be such a dedicated warrior to the Guru, because he was already in service of the Guru for something with the same level of commitment, right? So it was just natural. Guru Sahib says, here, copy these granths and distribute. Right. Here, go fight this battle.
Yeah.
Here, go clean this area because we're going to do a Divan.
Right.
Here, go prepare langar.
Right.
To the Gursikh that's dedicated to the Guru, it doesn't matter what the task is. It's just done with 100% dedication.
Right.
Right.
No, and so, I love this that you do just need to be so compassionate. If you don't build those bridges with people, you don't have that, in this case, you're committed to the Guru, where your center guiding light brings you back to the service where, I never understood, but now I understand more. I feel, the idea that, am I saying this right? Satgur ki seva safal hai. Is that?
Yep.
So maybe my interpretation right now isn't, fully, I'd imagine it's not full at all, but the idea, I didn't first understand maybe at all what it meant, but now I feel like I have some idea that if you, in essence, had some great thing that, let's say you had an amazing car in your garage. Well, if you love it, you're not going to let it rust. You're not going to let it, deteriorate. You're going to serve it. So if you, have a guru, you have a Guru Granth Sahib in your house, then your highest service, it isn't necessarily that the guru is being served, or that in the way I've thought about it, that the guru needs this service, but that your service is to feed your soul, and that service is a catharsis. It is a spiritual growth that you go through, that it is sort of the highest form of action that you could take, because that path that it takes you down, like in the, context of Baba Deep Singh, it leads to these, to a life that's worth living, to a full life that involves, not just the brutal aspects of warfare, but in a righteous manner, that you're, fighting for righteousness and against injustice, but that you're also, cultivating the softness within you. You've cultivated this poetic nature, this connection with Gurbani. And when we, get trapped in this single-minded thinking that, we don't want to achieve this idea of union, we do not want to cultivate both aspects of the strength and the softness. We don't want to have the, concept that we don't want to listen to those we disagree with, but we'll only listen to those that we agree with. We need to have that unity, because going even earlier in the discussion, these bonds are what will bring things together. When you are in a county and bringing it now to even real estate, because I love when things come full circle. You know that about me. Somehow I feel like, I'm sure even in any discussion, even in your experience with these podcasts, I feel it's a magical thing when things come full circle. But so in real estate, it's a simple idea of buildings and how they interact with people. So in Copenhagen, where they have some of the highest walkability, they have some of the highest, happiness levels, obviously Nordic countries. But on a city design level, the city redesigned its philosophy to be one of, how do we serve the pedestrians? How do we serve the people and not the cars? Cars on a real estate level have been served with how cities have been designed now since, the beginning of the automobile. And it's, in a sense, divided people in longer distances, not in a walkability type fashion that you can easily go and walk and meet people on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
So these divisions aren't just, hey, I'm not listening to, the Trump supporter and I deleted him off Facebook. This is also on a human built, real estate level where everything you need requires you to go in Joe Rogan maybe mentioned this, but isn't it wild? We go in a metal box, right? And it has wheels and an engine, but that's essentially we're in this closed off vehicle. It's all a singular based, individual based concept, public, to hell with public transportation in Michigan because, they wanted to sell us all these automobiles. But with public transportation, you're intermingling, you're rubbing shoulders. Now, granted, people have seen many videos on the New York
there's
subways.
A lot of bad stuff that happens too, but yeah,
absolutely.
But we get the point though. Yeah.
So the more human interaction you can have, and this I'll connect to Tony Hsieh from Zappos. So Tony Hsieh, started a company. He had, acquired this wealth and he decides, well, hey, how can I actually do good? He takes his downtown to downtown Las Vegas, not the strip, but actual downtown, which was, overrun by, crime and, homelessness, which I'm not going to demean. Homelessness is its own challenge that we aren't rising to challenge to fix. But so he goes to these areas. He went to this area. He creates his campus for Zappos. Zappos, the philosophy for that campus was, they wanted to bring it to an area that would allow for the cross contact between strangers, between their employees and other people from other diverse fields. Because this idea of cross-pollination between human beings is where when you have great advancements. Now, throughout history, the text, the book, the kitab, that was our way of communication, the newspaper. Right. Now, with this service, Zoom, with ways to connect through all these channels digitally, we have this ability to cross-pollinate. However, going back to social media, now you do not cross-pollinate when you are simply pollinating from the same philosophies, same ideas.
Well, the algorithms are also pushing that, right? The algorithms are matching you and giving you the information that already coincides with what you've liked and interacted with. So it's reinforcing that thinking.
This is what they understand too. Many executives have stepped down from these organizations. They've, obviously many people have boycotted them for various reasons, one of them being this. And this is something an individual must know about blind spots. I'm a big believer that in order to grow, like Ray Dalio has a book called Principles. Yep. It's all about how do you find the things you're weak at and work on getting better. Right. It's a very simple idea, but people avoid trying to be better at what they're bad at because they either will think I'm always going to be bad at it, or they just don't want to challenge themselves.
Yeah, it's either I think it's either it's too challenging or it's a like a psychological sore spot. Like it's hard to admit that I'm really bad. I'm just not willing to do it. That's all.
It is. And life should all be about growth. Life should be that we are seeking to grow, in the terms of Sikhi, obviously on the path of Sikhi, and, in terms of humanity on the path of spirituality and to become better people. But, so the idea that if you're, not cross-pollinating, you're not bringing in those new ideas, you need to know your blind spots. You need to know how are you being exploited? How is the algorithm forcing your mind to think more in a distinct channel and not challenging you to think differently. And so that's something it's important. I think in general, we know what our weaknesses are, whether you want to call them blind spots or weaknesses, and then obviously to address them because they'll be exploited by others. If we don't address them, someone else will manipulate us, whether it's the algorithm, whether it's maybe a spouse, maybe kids, maybe friends, whoever, workplace boss. And so when it comes to Zappos, the idea was we create these, these communities I'll get to actually. So he actually started his own trailer park. He took over a trailer park
Okay.
in downtown Las Vegas, and he actually lives in it. I believe he may still live in it, but he lived in it, an Airstream trailer. And so the idea was he had this sort of tiny house village, and many people might be familiar with the tiny house movement or whatnot, but essentially it's just real estate's become so expensive. You know, the Canadians listening will know that more than even the Americans maybe these days. But the idea that the pressure on real estate's been so high that there's high unaffordability for people. 35% of people in America, they don't, own a home. They are renters. And only out of the 65% who are homeowners, 40% of them have their homes paid off. So there's still a significant amount of people that are a slave to the banks. So you have this pressure now these days that has forced people to either they're going to stay being perpetual renters, which you're at the whim of a landlord. And the idea of a landlord being, this is sort of a neo-serfdom type concept where you are on the land of a lord. You
Right.
are paying rent. And this, relationship you have is a power dynamic that, isn't essentially the best for an individual because you want to become free. And the idea, even in spiritual terms, is we want to become, in a sense, free from all attachments. We want to be boundless. We don't want to be a slave to anything besides the guru and Vaheguru. And so that relationship of this, they may call it debt slavery when you're, enslaved by debt to the banks and enslaved to other power structures, whether it's the landlord or your work, place with the boss and that employer and employee relationship, which has its own solutions in worker cooperatives, which you can build these democratic workplaces that have structures that truly bring equity to the workers, that don't allow people like Jeff Bezos to accumulate such vast sums of wealth.
Right. So what you're saying there is the structure of the company is such that the equity goes back to the workers.
Absolutely.
At a much better proportion. And
Absolutely.
even if you're the CEO or the founder of the company or whatever, your pay is capped or tied to your worker. So when the pay goes up for you, it goes up for everybody. So that means there's
Right.
less money to concentrate with the owner.
Right. And generally now we've seen maybe these numbers where salary to CEO pay or CEO pay to salary is 500 to 1. That's a number thrown around. So that generally was more around 50 to 1.
Right.
So
it's 10 times greater than what it used to be.
And the idea of wealth inequality needs to be put into a, more of a manageable
And wait,
term.
by the way, in that same 30-year period, the average wage didn't move much.
Right. Stagnated. And we've had a stripping of worker rights. We've had a stripping of, what do you call them? When people get together, collective bargaining and unions. See, it's so out of style. I don't even remember the name. But so obviously people like Jeff Bezos are cracking down on that. Employees getting fired if they're trying to unionize. And now with COVID, with how they've been treated, it's just more apparent and glaring how the employee is just being used as a cog in the wheel of a corporation. And another concept I'd like to even add, the idea of a corporation, you could link it with the idea of Citizens United, where they said a corporation is essentially an individual. The idea of a corporation comes from corpus, which is body. And so the idea that a corporation is essentially a faceless entity that obviously has human beings, but the way it's being run today, human beings are being used as an input, as if it's a corporation that life itself, human life, was meant to serve a corporation. So the problem that comes from that is, shouldn't life be about serving humanity, not a faceless entity that has its own desires in a charter that we're serving? Because
just in general, a corporation, it has a responsibility to its shareholders.
Right.
It has a duty to maintain its bottom line and make profits. It is not inherent in that structure that it is to better society.
That's true. And so Jamie Dimon, and there's a corporate roundtable that met last year. they decided to change some of the rules of governance. And, they became a little more human-centered. The problem is we cannot count on Jamie Dimon or Lloyd Blankfein or any of these people to truly adopt the most human-centered approach.
Yeah.
The corporation has a lifespan that could last much longer than a human being, hundreds of years.
Right.
There's even a corporation out of Japan that I believe is maybe 1,000 years old. I mean, these corporations last much longer than a human being. So philosophically, if you think about it, it's hard for me to actually even sort of express this idea because it's more so been simmering in my mind more lately. Human beings, let's say if you think of in terms of mortgage interest, a bank would lend out money to people and they would expect a certain amount of return in terms of interest and the terms on a loan based on the span of a human life. That's what would create the bounds on how do you determine how long a mortgage should last and how much should an interest payment be, because it wouldn't make sense if it took 200 years to pay off your mortgage. But
we're saying that, but that's exactly what they're working on, right? Actually, in Japan, I think they already have a 100-year mortgage or something like that, where it's passed down to your children.
Well, so I think the pressures that may have pushed that to occur even beyond, Japan's situation, being a, stagnating country going through, I don't know if it's still, but the idea of stagflation, but the idea they haven't grown, they've had their central bank prop up their stock market, and just similar to now what we're getting into. And Japan's a good kind of indicator of where we're headed in many ways, with how their elderly are lonely, with loneliness when it comes to the idea of pod style living, to try to, squeak out every square foot of real estate because the, economy doesn't allow for affordable living. But when it comes
that's exactly why they've made those huge mortgages like that, because they're trying to bring the cost down, but also have you trapped longer. Well,
so in one sense, though, if you think of the idea of a corporation, if it's, bound to last hundreds of years, they could then, in their time scales of thinking, be thinking then we will have a term that's 100 years. We will pay an interest rate that is such and such in terms of our ideas on what a term is.
Right, because the corporation will be there. We won't.
And here's the important key, I think. The corporation has led to basically setting the foundation for the financial economy that affects human beings.
Right.
That is the problem, is that we are in an economy that is working on the corporation's goals, that's working on the corporation's timelines, and everything's priced based on their abilities, their time frames. But that affects the normal person, because if everything's being sold on that level, well, we don't live for hundreds of years. But if our mortgages are 100 years, we'll never become free from a 100-year mortgage. If interest rates, were, I'll give you an example. So 70, 80 years ago in the early 1900s in the US, generally, when you had mortgages, the minimum amount to pay was 50% down payment.
Yeah.
And you only had 5-year terms. I just was reading this the other day. And so the idea being, on a human time frame, when the economy, you would expect, as an investor, as a human investor, right, as an individual human investor, that you would want to maybe double your money in 5 to 10 years. Because why would you only want to double your money in 100 years? That's not fun. That's nothing. So, but a corporation that could be there for 1,000 years, well, yeah, maybe having an interest rate of 2-3%, doubling it in 50 years is okay.
It scales well for them. It's
right.
Okay,
so for them, that sets what they're okay with, but that then affects regular human beings that still only live for that 70, 80-year period, that then are stuck into these 200-year or 100-year mortgages, or that only are getting 2% on their money, 1% on their money, because the corporations have now created an economy that is centered around their sort of interest. And so we have systems we have tools now that people, not now, this is a general thing that's existed throughout humanity, that we can reorganize the whole system. On a corporate level, we can have worker cooperatives. that will serve human beings, that will not have the 500-to-1 division of pay, that will not exacerbate inequality, that will decrease inequality, that will not allow a CEO to make $20 million to then go to the Hamptons, buy a $50 million house because they have the money to bid up that real estate. They have the money to go to Christie's to buy it, to bid up a painting to $200 million. So if you take away that purchasing power from them, none of those things would exist in that manner. They wouldn't be priced in that manner, and you would give more purchasing
and they
power.
may not exist. There's people, if that's the other thing, that opulent, overindulgent, super luxury may not exist in that world either, because the resources wouldn't be there to produce it.
And that's a good point. When you have yachts, you cannot build a $1 billion yacht for a billionaire when there are no billionaires.
Right.
You cannot put together a company that has 1,000 employees or 100 employees to design the yacht, to build the yacht, to take resources from this planet that are limited, to tie them up in time, freeze them in that yacht. You would not have that ability when that Roman Abramovich or whoever billionaire you want to use, does not have the ability to do that. And then instead, that labor would be diverted into hopefully more beneficial things. The resources would be diverted into more beneficial things. And we would not have a world where billionaires or even just multimillionaires with tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, which, look, those people, they're really not counted. I've looked into some of the statistics. There are many of them. There's only about 2,000, 2,500 billionaires. There's way more people worth 100 million, 500 million, but you don't see lists of that. You don't see lists of people worth 50 million, but that's a considerable amount of money. That can affect many people's lives on an individual, local level, on an investing level, where money is spent, how resources are used. And so,
but the problem is, like, philosophically, this is ideal. It's very, very difficult to say that you're going to take away something from someone who earned it already. So it has to be a different process, right? You can't just take it away from them. Yes, you can try to tax them, or you can incentivize them to put their money in other places, but then you're still incentivizing them somehow.
Okay, we're now in the perfect place. You're going to love this. You're going to love this. So when it comes to capitalism and the little bit I've learned about communism or Marxism, just kind of a more socialist philosophy, there's sort of stages of capitalism as well that capitalism evolves through. We're apparently in a cannibalism stage. Where capitalism has evolved to a point where it's cannibalizing now even government programs to try to privatize education, privatize Social Security, privatize, obviously we have privatized healthcare. They don't want to do that, make it socialized. But the last vestiges of even now what's left of the public sphere, we have private prisons, for hell's sake. Yeah. What's that doing?
Even the military, which is our biggest socialist program.
Raytheon.
Yeah. It's turning private. They divert the money into private contracts and call it military spending.
And on that note, just so people know, there's over $1 trillion of economic output that occurs every year due to the military, with the Scud missiles, the F-35 fighter jet program, all of that goes on. If that was not spent on that, we would be in a recession. The economy would automatically not be able to function at the level it's at due to the leverage and how the economy works. We would not be able to sustain. We would go into recession. So the idea being that we are tied into a system that if we do not go to war, if those missiles do not launch, if those planes don't blow up, if those warships, if everything isn't being produced, Northrop Grumman's not paying the bills, Boeing's not paying the bills.
Well, it's not even just going to war and things blowing up. What we do is we go to countries and say, hey, you want to buy our old stuff? Right. You'll have a huge advantage in your region. As long as we have the newer, better stuff, we sell off the old stuff.
And to a great degree, I'm sure it's somehow tactical, because we end up funding the people we end up going to war with. It's all ridiculous. But we need to redirect the economy. Now, Bernie Sanders is talking about a New Deal, the idea that we need to globally bound together on a climate platform, on a climate change activism platform that would truly unite us as humanity, because we cannot individually as countries fight this. America or China or any country, if they did 100% what they did, well, guess what? The pollution from those countries still exists on this whole planet. It's a unified planet. Right. So essentially
it has to be a global effort. It has to be, and everybody has different wants and needs in that global effort. And that's the kind of politicking and diplomacy you need. And those people do need to be playing 4D chess.
They do. And with the idea of the global South, the poorest half of the world, they are in a point where they are on a growth curve. They're using more of the, fossil fuels to, use in their scooters to go and, have economic impact, to grow their economies.
Yeah.
They have a good argument to say, well, hey, look, China, hey, look, America, hey, look, Britain, you guys had your chance to grow. Why are you taking away from us?
Right.
We don't get to also become first world countries. We don't get to have the luxuries and amenities you have had.
Right.
So it is a economic program that will have to occur to invest in those nations so that they do not get left behind, because we have squandered the resources of oil in a great degree because if you realize the potential capacity of energy that was given to us by God, that this was an amount of joules of energy, for all the scientists out there, that existed underground, that we had nothing to do with. These are rotting dinosaurs and trees and so on, that we could have tapped into to create that Star Trek society from the get-go if that was the vision. Right. But we didn't. We had the Bush family extract oil so they could become rich. We had other Halliburton and Cheney, and they do their stuff and have these oil, in my opinion, oil-based wars. And so the idea, though, that we squandered this resource in order to have individualistic goals for people to become selfishly rich, to not think of society as a whole, to not see this as a true heritage for all humanity, in a sense that all of humanity owns these resources.
Yeah,
together.
It's Sarbatapala.
Exactly, and to manage them with that concept that we want to use this like in the Native American fashion, that there is no ownership of this land. This is I forget the exact terminology, but this is a common heritage of mankind, that we all have this and share this, not own this, we share this. And so with Sarbatapala, you would use oil instead from day one to think, not how am I going to extract all the barrels and sell them and, make as much money to buy my own large mansion, but we all share this. We all should try to build the society we all sought to want to build in a very harmonious way. But now we have a chance, though, still, luckily, that we can use the little bit of resources we have left with oil and gas, and we can still transition to a new economy based on renewables. But this is the challenge. And I've mentioned this to you before. You have to, if you don't want a decline in living standards, you have to replace energy 1-to-1. Right. Or you have to make things more efficient.
Right.
Things have to work off of.
No, the problem is even when they make things more efficient, they still keep the price tag high for the profit margins.
Well, yeah, the items will cost more. Yeah. And that this will.
But you're right. Like it has to be a 1-to-1 because it has to be a very simple and cost-effective transition. Otherwise, you can't get the masses on board because people aren't there. They don't have the economic freedom to adopt.
That's true, but this is the kicker that people forget, and I know you have this viewpoint that I disagree with, that we will always be able to reinvent ourselves out of a predicament.
Yes.
I do not believe that.
I do.
I believe we have the ability, but the ego will get in the way. It does get in the way. I'm not saying it's guaranteed to get in the way, but when we have, let's say, with the resources we have, there will be, it's almost guaranteed, if we do not hasten this transition, a collapse in overall society in terms of not like, hey, it's all Mad Max, but instead of affording 2 cars, you afford 1. Instead of going on a plane trip, for $50, it's $500.
Yeah.
It'd be more difficult to do these things we've seen as luxuries because the cheap energy is gone. Now we have a smaller amount that we have to distribute in order to keep all of our systems afloat, that electric running in all the buildings and everything going. We either have to consume less so that we meet whatever our current level or that future production level will be, if it's less than the current level we have with oil and gas, or we're going to have to increase that. And our capacity isn't there with wind, with solar, with, even nuclear. We're not there. It takes 30 years to get a solar plant online. You'd have to I was reading, it was like one a day you'd have to put online for years to fully meet the demand for the future. And we are not there at all. We will not be there. So most likely what I see is there will be a collapse in demand, where there will have to be a transition to a lower level lifestyle for people, a simpler life, because there won't be all this abundance with this energy that we did not earn. We did not put in this effort to build society the way it is. This is from oil that was given over millions of years. This is an energy not from human efforts, but from an outside input that is now dwindling. If we were able to sustain it just by our own efforts, then it wouldn't go away. But it is going away. So going back to your question.
I think they are working on it. They got scientists working on stuff like that. There's like a bacteria that can eat plants and produce oil, stuff like that. So crude or whatever.
I'm the cynic, and I'll think once they develop.
But you're right. That is the actual problem, and that's why scientists are working on different ways to tackle it. And we don't have the solution right now, and you don't know when the solution is going to be there. And this is another reason why people also push nuclear energy. Right.
I'm all for nuclear. It's been a lot safer with its waste and everything. But ultimately, I will always err on the side that God is always the most powerful, that nature is more powerful than man. Look at tsunamis, look at earthquakes, hurricanes, everything.
But hurricanes, I think you can drop nuclear bombs. And
yes, you can do all kinds of things apparently and make them go away. But, I'll hold my breath. I hope we do transition more gracefully, but I think it could be a hard transition. And, we'll in my own preparation, I'll just mention what I feel like I'm aiming for in my life. I'm aiming for, like your brother even, I hope you have him on.
Yeah, I hope he'll come on. I talked to him. I think he'll come on, but we'll see.
It'll be good. He's, with his house he's building and, when it comes to net zero, when it comes to, the idea of just sustainability in general and being off the grid, I'm interested to hear your brother's reasoning for everything with his build. But for me, it's more so for security. I don't trust society to always have the lights running. I don't trust society to always have the gas on, to always have everything running perfectly. Now, to just plant the seed in people's minds. Today, to have the idea of a homestead, a self-sufficient way of life, is so much easier than ever before.
Right.
You have solar panels on your roof that give you electricity. Yes, granted, you have to earn the money to get to that point. That's the energy you have to put in. But that will curtail all the effort that 100 years ago people were chopping up trees to put into their, wood stoves to cook and heat their home.
Right. Yeah, that actually evolved very quickly in the history of the world, right?
With oil.
With oil, but we also figured out to get beyond it. And yes, there is a price tag to it, and it can be a little bit difficult to make the permanent move, but more and more people are doing that. And I think the more people do that, the prices will come down and more people will see how that works and they'll want it for themselves.
And there's a parity that's, I think, even maybe achieved, or it's close to being achieved, where the kilowatt hour price for solar is now equivalent.
Which is why the energy companies will buy it back from you. If you produce more than you need, they'll actually pay you for what you overproduce, because it's worth it for them.
And that's a great incentive. Now, I would just say that the idea is where, I know your brother has some Teslas. Maybe you'll get some Teslas or electric vehicles. But when
the prices come down, that's probably true.
Yeah, and price is definitely one of the key points that's going to be there for people for adoption. But so when you have this just to sell this to people, think about not just with solar, and now you can easily heat your home and have whatever you have, induction cooktops that are electrical. You don't need gas. You could have electric water heating, electric furnace, everything. Obviously your AC being electric. So everything in your system can just be ran off electric. You don't need gas. You don't need propane. So the point being, the energy it would have taken to do all that, to be sufficient energy wise, now is just a set of, maybe depending on your house size, just 5-10 solar panels that sit on your roof, versus the investment cutting down the trees every year,
Right.
splitting the trees, doing that type of work. Now, these days, there's no idea of outhouses for normal people. We have plumbing, all the conveniences of now water. You can obviously, get from a city. Now we see with not just Flint, but
it's all over. Yeah.
Well, yeah, many places.
All the problems.
So
because it has to be maintained. Again, we're not spending the money on maintaining the things that help the most people. We run after these other things and we ignore. And then what happens is the most vulnerable in our society end up being victims to that, neglect.
And that's where essentially, I think, like the gurus, essentially, from what I've heard and what I've understood, they essentially was serving the most neglected in society. Not just the poorest, not just the most destitute, but those that were being the most oppressed, the people that were, had it the hardest under these regimes. And likewise, as a Sikh, I feel a sense of guilt if I think I will enjoy life in a luxurious manner when there's still suffering on this planet. I cannot justify the idea that, even I do live a very comfortable life, and there's a certain level where, yes, you need, yes, we may call them needs, but these days they are in a sense, but we need a heated home. We need shoes. We need maybe transportation. We need, these things, internet now, these are things we need. And so, yes, there's a sense when you have it, you're thankful for it. But when you go above and you think, well, now I'm going to have the $100,000, $200,000 or $500,000 car or house or whatever.
Right.
There's a certain balance. Obviously, everyone has their own needs. You may have 3-4 kids. You may have other needs to support other families and so on. But we can easily see there's not a need for Jeff Bezos to have a $50 million penthouse in DC or in New York and buy out other buildings and create this mega mansion and do these kinds of things, where that would be super full of guilt for me if I was actually the way I think now, where I could not justify, hey, there's these people suffering. I'm just going to do my own thing and be selfish, even though I know it would help some people. Right. So back to the idea, though, when you have this self-sufficiency, with Flint, with the whole, water contamination, you can't rely essentially, especially more so, like you mentioned, on the lower end of society, lower on the socioeconomic scale. You cannot rely on the systems to be there for you. Now, even on another level, I mean, look at the blackout that occurred in whatever it was, 2014 or, that.
No, it wasn't 14. It was older than that.
Yeah, 2007. I forget.
Yeah. It must be like 15 years ago. And you're right. It was a week of no power.
Yep.
And it was weird. It got weird. People were worried about grocery stores and groceries and food going bad, and you couldn't go to the store and get it. You couldn't come home and store it. It was a weird week, and it really did expose a lot of those vulnerabilities. And
so those are things where you look at our infrastructure, at least in the US, the civil architects and engineers, the group that rates it gives it a D minus, something like that. So you have bridges that routinely collapse. You have an infrastructure with, no real high-speed rail system connecting cities. I mean, we're far behind countries like Japan, China even. They have, obviously, there are many ghost towns, but they've invested that surplus, the trade surplus they got from the U.S. in physical, cities they built that will be populated in the future. And the power will continue to shift to the east. India will, I'm sure, continue to rise. And they have set themselves up, countries like even the United Arab Emirates, they have beautiful infrastructure. They have, obviously socially, they have a lot of challenges they need to overcome. But on a physical, economic level, this is where the transition from the West to East has been going on for decades.
Yeah.
And going from a creditor nation to a debtor nation as the US, exploding national debts.
Yeah.
And this is where your risk as being a US citizen of, people now, renouncing their citizenship, like Eduardo Saverin from one of the founders of Facebook, going to Singapore with his billions, because, you have a favorable tax climate. Now, not to say the US should serve those people, but on a normal human level, when it comes to the bridges, the water systems, Flint, and so on, and the countless other communities with lead water, and even you have the Virginia and those communities with the water that you can light on fire due to the coal mining and so on. These issues, fracking and everything, where the corporate interests are served, human beings are suffering, and would you rather bet that the politicians and the system will work in your favor? And now, granted, most of the listeners here, most likely, I'd imagine, will not be the most destitute people. But that suffering that exists.
But still, it's a matter of awareness. It's a matter of information.
Yeah.
You get the right information, and you can start to think different. You can start to behave different.
And that idea that, I do not trust the U.S. government. I do not trust the systems in place, even though for me, I don't have a reason to be scared. I have enough security financially, support networks, and so on, that I could easily just want to decide I want to be fully within society, fully, take that idea that society, I feel, has brainwashed many people to a blind spot where maybe many people realize is we've been programmed to be individualistic. Even as Sikhs, we might be thinking, yes, Naam Simran karo, Seva karo, all these things, but how much is it turning into life on a fundamental basis when it comes to economically? How much have we served our own interests economically?
You're very right about that, but that's probably a whole nother
discussion,
right? Because how we think about our money and stuff.
It is. And I only mention that because when it comes to these communities that are underserved, underrepresented, the only voice they have, yes, they have their voice, but in many ways it's suppressed. Politicians will not listen. They are simply just not, heard. Right. Governor Rick Snyder goes off scot-free with the things that he was under charge of and under his administration that occurred with Flint. And so there's no repercussions. There's no responsibility. There's no feedback loop for corrections to occur. As in our body, we have feedback loops that allow for certain signals to be sent. And that's how the harmony within the body, the homeostasis, occurs within us and along with the natural world. But on a human level, we've taken away these feedback loops. We do not have accountability in corporations. They get bailouts. They don't go bankrupt. Right. The true capitalist system does not exist, or whatever true.
Yeah, even for the people that are proponents of capitalism, you're not living with capitalism. You're living with government-supported capitalism, which is like a socialist capitalism. Even the proponents of capitalism should say, hey, this is wrong. We don't want this.
And it's all fear-based. When you had the 2007 recession, you had Hank Paulson meeting with the top bankers and himself being a Goldman Sachs banker.
Right.
Being threatened. If you do not bail us out, the U.S. economy will implode within 72 hours.
We're going to just watch it crumble right in front of us.
So it's at a point where we've been kept hostage by these people, I won't even say people, by the corporations that happen to be filled, but not happen to be, but they are filled by these positions by human beings that take advantage of these positions. But so this system that's serving the corporation, that's underrepresenting the common man, I do not have faith that it will serve. When I say me, I want to see myself as more of a common man because I want to be a regular person. I don't want to think yes, I have privilege, but I don't want to think in terms of I want to be a person that will be simply looking out for themselves. Right. Because that's that mainstream brainwashing, I think, especially it seems Western society has in a sense, propagated through the whole world of individualism. This is where the manifest destiny, the idea of we're going to go out west, young man, make a life for yourself, have, get a piece of land and, just, take it, because back then you just put a fence up and it was yours.
Yeah, you just stake it out. It's yours.
Right. And, granted, yes, it was not even granted, but it was taken from, in a sense, people who were there with Native Americans, but they had a different philosophy. They did not necessarily believe in an ownership in the sense we have of a title and so on.
Well, I think that's some of them. There was such a wide range of different kinds of people living here. Some of them were very territorial. Some of them were not.
Right.
Some of them were very aggressive and violent. Some of them were not. So like there's a whole range. But you know what? I think what we're going to do is let's end here, because we already gave a good run on this. But talking about land and ownership is a perfect stopping point, because next time you come back, I really want you to talk about this co-living communities and more on the tiny homes and things like that, because there's a great philosophy behind that. And I'm not 100% on board yet, but you've been slowly nudging me along, and I'm starting to see that there not only could be a great future for it, but maybe it might be the most responsible thing to do.
Well, thank you, Vijay. I definitely look forward to continuing the discussion, and I definitely want to address, not now at this point, but to, seed it for the next discussion, where you were mentioning, what are the ways we can reform the system, and to say that I want to start the next discussion with the idea of competition. So the idea that you take capitalism's own philosophy of competition and use it against itself. And that's the way you can, through competition, win over and create a new system. So I think that's where maybe we can pick up right there next time.
And we'll figure out a time to get you back here. Hopefully within the next maybe few weeks here, we can get back to you and do another episode. And it's easy. Maybe soon enough, we might even start being able to do these in person.
Sure. I mean, maybe the next one, even this would be nice only because it went well. Why jinx it, right? I don't know. So I don't know.
No, it was good. It was really good. Harjap Singh, thank you very much for stepping into the Nihung's arena, and we will talk to you soon.
ठीक है जी.
Okay.
वाहिगुरू जी का खालसा, वाहिगुरू जी की फतेह.